Reid Lodge was 19 years old. He faced a very difficult conversation with his family and friends. He was assigned female at birth, but had realized he identified as male. Reid is transgender, and he's speaking out to help people who may be going through the same kind of experience. He's taking part in a panel discussion on transgender issues in New Brunswick as a part of Pride Week. Reid Lodge joined me in the studio. Good morning, Reid.
Hi.
Why is it important for you to be part of this discussion?
I think it's just really important for people to see out trans people who are willing to be open about their experiences, just because, as you were talking about earlier, it's just something that doesn't always come up unless you see it happening. And then once you do sort of get into those discussions, it's a lot easier to learn more about like what trans people go through.
Absolutely. When you see it or are aware of it, you can have those discussions, for example, as I mentioned to you, that I've had with my own sons.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about you and when you were first aware that you were transgender.
I didn't actually know that trans people existed really until I was probably in early high school. But even then, I had only ever really seen trans people on TV, and it's not always a good representation.
So what were those portrayals like?
Yeah, they weren't always great. So it's usually like when you see a trans person on TV, especially in a show like CSI or something, it's very over-sensationalized. It's not really an accurate depiction of what trans people go through or what trans people are actually like. There's often a lot of pathologizing and a lot of negative stereotypes that are perpetuated. So I really didn't have a very positive view of trans people when I first learned about them. And I didn't actually meet a trans person until I was in university that I knew of course. I'm sure I'd probably met some before that, I just didn't know. But anyway, and meeting him was a very big eye-opener for me because meeting an actual person who was going through it was very different from watching it on a show like CSI. That's the one that I keep coming back to because it's the most salient example to me. And I started learning a little bit more about him and kind of his own feelings about his gender. And I think I was probably around 19 or 20 years old at the time. And then it just kind of clicked for me. I was like, wow, like this is kind of very similar to feelings that I've had, and I just didn't know where they were coming from.
Do you mind if I ask how old you are now?
I'm 24 now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So initially, you came out as a lesbian, right? If I got that right?
Yep. I came out as a lesbian in high school just because I was attracted to women, and I didn't realize that it was possible to identify as a different gender. So I was like, well, this seems to fit with what's going on with me right now. So I did live out as a lesbian for several years before I started transitioning.
So how did that come about, that transition, and coming to live as yourself, as Reid, on a daily basis?
It was kind of a very quick transition for me. For some people, it's very gradual, but for me, as soon as I started learning about it, and I met my friend, and then I started reading about it online, and I was like, wow, like these are experiences that many people have that I just didn't know were so common and had a name. So it was probably a period of about 6 months where I shifted from identifying as a woman to identifying as a man.
Was that hard for you?
It was very difficult because there's a lot of constant coming out you have to do. So I had to come out to my family, I had to come out to my friends, I had to come out at work, I had to come out to my teachers at school, my classmates. So it was a very stressful.
That's intense.
Yeah, it was a very stressful period, and I definitely had a lot of anxiety and depression going on at the same time, just because when you do realize that this thing has been happening to you your whole life and you didn't know exactly what it was, you're kind of like reevaluating your whole life and you're like, wow, like so many things could have been so much easier.
I think it must be difficult, for someone who's never been through that to really understand what those feelings are like.
Yeah.
To not quite understand who you are and then to try and find that identity. It's not as black and white or even as, I want to say, easy as coming out, for example, as a lesbian, which is not that easy.
Yeah.
But compared to coming out transgender, I mean, it's just one more difficult step on that road.
Yeah, and definitely if the responses to the articles that have been in the paper any indication, a lot of people just don't really understand what's going on. They seem to think that trans people are asking, one of the major issues that we're talking about right now is coverage of surgeries in New New Brunswick, and a lot of people seem to think that we're just demanding something superfluous or unnecessary, which isn't the case, especially if you look at the research that's been done. There's a lot of evidence that it's very important to affirm people in their transition rather than restricting them.
And the surgery is another issue. Not everyone who identifies as transgender then decides to have surgery.
No, exactly. There's a lot of reasons why people might not choose to have surgery. So a lot of people have health problems. There's a lady in St. John right now who's taking a human rights claim against the province because she's actually unable to have certain procedures done because she's had cancer. And then there are other people who just don't want surgery. So it's just not necessary for them. They might only choose to go through hormones or just social transition. So it's a very wide range of experiences.
Well, let's talk about your transition period. Let's go back to when you had to discuss this with your family.
Mm-hmm.
So how did your parents and your siblings react to this news?
My dad and my brother both reacted very positively, so that was a huge relief for me.
Must have felt good.
Yeah, definitely. I actually came out to my dad in an email because he was away at work, and he's usually very quick at getting back to my emails, but I sent him this email and he didn't answer me for 2 or 3 days, and I was kind of like, oh no, like what's going on? But he called me finally when he got it and talked to me, and he said it was like completely fine, and he shifted over to using a new name and pronouns right away. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
I know, it was really, I mean, my dad has always been very accepting, and I wasn't really super worried about it, but I was a little bit worried about how easily he would be able to make that change, which turned out it was actually very easy for him.
And your brother?
And my brother, actually, when I came out to him, he said, I've always wanted a brother, so that was that was really nice.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah, it was a really kind of overwhelming but very positive
I
experience.
just bet it was.
Yeah.
Any difficulties in those relationships, either not necessarily with your parents, but anyone else in your family in terms of that?
My whole dad's side of the family has been very open. So my aunt and uncle actually just recently learned that their son is trans as well. So it's been very helpful for them, I think, to know me and just be able to come talk to me about my experiences. And my mom's side of the family has had a little bit more difficulty, I think mostly because they're very strictly Baptist, religious sort of people, and they're not even really very open to gay and lesbian people. Not that they're bad people, they're just, like, it's just very slow and
It's been
gradual.
more difficult
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah, for them to kind of understand what's
You
happening.
sound as if you're accepting, though, and forgiving about that.
Oh yeah, like I definitely didn't expect everyone to come around right away, and I was very surprised when as many people as did come around right away kind of accepted me.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely a few people who have had a more gradual experience coming to terms with it, but nobody who's been, in my family at least, who's been very openly hostile or anything like that.
How long did it take you to think of yourself with that masculine pronoun, to think of yourself as he, as Reid?
It didn't take myself very long. You do kind of get used to growing up being referred to a certain way, referring to yourself that way too. So even like when in the first probably year and a half of my transition, I would make mistakes referring to myself occasionally. But thinking of myself as a trans person, kind of like as soon as I realized what was going on, it was a thing that happened right away.
Have there been any surprises for you along the way so far in how this has worked out, how the transition has happened?
I think it was just like once I started learning more about trans people in general, it was just surprising to me that none of this information is given to younger people. Because I think that if I had had this knowledge growing up, everything would have been a lot easier. Because I did struggle with feeling uncomfortable about my body probably since like 6th grade or so. So I was probably about 12.
That's such a tough time.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and yeah, and I just assumed that everybody went through this, and that everybody had just learned to deal with it, and it just wasn't, like, I don't know, something that other people felt the need to talk about, whereas for me, I seem to be struggling a lot. And I think that if I had just known that trans people existed and were in my community, because I also didn't know that trans people existed in New Brunswick, I figured it was just something like extremely rare, that it would be next to impossible for me to ever meet someone like that.
Which makes me wonder about things, the reality shows, I Am Jazz, the stories. There's been so much in the media about high-profile celebrities such as Caitlyn Jenner, who was Bruce Jenner. Has that, do you think, had a positive impact in terms of, just that information now being out there, being more common?
I definitely think that having trans people in the media who can speak for themselves has been a very positive thing. Laverne Cox, Janet Mock, Caitlyn Jenner, they're all great voices for the trans community, and I know Jazz Jennings has actually written a book as well, a children's book, which I think is really helpful to have something like that for younger people to be able to access.
And in Fredericton, what kind of issues do you think are people facing here for the Fredericton transgender community? Are the issues getting easier? Is it getting easier to deal with this in our community, or do you think there's still a ways to go?
I definitely think that New Brunswick in general still has a long way to go. We mostly kind of in this province struggle with basic issues like access to appropriate health care, human rights protections. We don't have any human rights protections in New Brunswick like there are in some other provinces. And a lot of people in New Brunswick, just like I wasn't, just aren't aware of trans people or what trans people go through or how to appropriately speak about trans people. So we come up to a lot of difficulties in kind of employment or housing situations.
Have you had any issues, any backlash?
I actually was very fortunate that I transitioned while I was working at Winners, which is one of the best LGBT friendly retail corporations. So that was actually really easy for me at work, whereas for some people it's not as easy.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
So how do you think talking about your experiences will help someone else?
Well, in terms of reaching out to people who may be trans themselves, it's really important for them to know that there are people in their community that they can go to talk to about these things. And then just educating people on general things like appropriate pronoun use or using correct names can go a long way in just helping trans people feel safer in the community.
It's respectful, right? If someone takes the time to use the proper name and the proper pronoun, it shows respect.
Exactly, yeah.
And are you done your transition? Are you completely through the transition for you?
For me, I feel like transition is really more of a lifelong process, and just because I choose to be out in my transition, where some people choose not to do that, I definitely think that there is a constant process for me of coming out and explaining to people and stuff like that. Whereas for some people, they might reach a certain point and say, okay, I'm through transition. In terms of like the medical aspect, I am trying to crowdfund a surgery right now because it's not covered under Medicare. So I still have about $10,000 left that I need to cover it. And so that's a very important step for me that I haven't made yet in my transition.
Do you feel comfortable in your own skin now? Do you feel comfortable in your own body when you're out walking and living your life?
I do feel a lot more comfortable, and probably that's actually one of the most amazing things that's happened to me in transition, because before I came out and transitioned, I was constantly uncomfortable, and I didn't know why. So I was always trying to find new strategies to make myself feel more comfortable, but I never found something that worked. Whereas now, when I get up and get dressed in the morning, I don't really have to think about it. I just do it, and I go about the rest of my day. So that was a huge struggle for me that I don't have to go through anymore.
And it must be a huge relief to just not have to think about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Before I let you go, what would you like to see people take away from Pride Week?
I just love to see new people come out and just experience the LGBT community and the events that we have going on. The festival is open to everybody, so if you just want to have a fun day on Sunday, come down to the festival. And there are a number
Lodge, a transgender person who lives in Fredericton. He's taking part in a transgender panel tomorrow night at the Crown Plaza as part of Fredericton Pride Week. And as he mentioned, for more details on that event and others this week, go to the Fredericton Pride